Nice. Well, thank you guys all for being here. And I mean, obviously, one of the biggest questions that I hear all the time is how do I get funding for my podcast? So just a little bit about me and who I am, who our organization is. So I'm Ty King with the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative. We are the country's only nonprofit organization for podcasters. And what does that mean being a nonprofit for podcasters? Well, one of the things we do is we offer free coaching and studio time with partners whenever we can, and basically provide resources that are free to people who would to either start a podcast or have a podcast and want to grow, or for the larger podcasts who need help with their funding. And that also applies to the anything below that as well. We speak around the country about podcasting, the power that it has, the versatility that it has. I mean, it's an up and coming, even though it's been around for 25 years over. It's such a versatile tool that it can be used for basically any situation. We've spoken at conferences about searching for employment and how it can be used there. We've done, podcast movement where we're talking about strictly, telling people stories. How can it be used for business? How can it be used for personal use or building a career or furthering a purpose for a nonprofit organization? So another thing that we do is that we, provide those resources and we teach, but we also host an annual podcast festival. We keep it here in Arkansas since that's where we were founded. And in case you're wondering, yeah, Arkansas Podcast Collaborative, the name itself, it doesn't limit us to Arkansas. It sort of just ties us to where we were started in the area that we're trying to grow, because our mission and vision, trying to grow a diverse community of podcasters in the Arkansas area. So obviously we're trying to push that and grow the industry here in the middle of the United States, the flyover states, where it sort of gets forgotten in the run, right? So you have the majority of podcasters and the big shows and the big industry leaders and people that serve that industry are on either coast, West Coast, East Coast, and the middle kind of gets forgotten. So what we do is we push those creatives in the center where all the flyover states are. They have just as much of a chance now to create something for themselves than ever, because the barrier to entry has never been lower. And if you wanted to be an actor, right? So you would always have to move to LA or New York, and you get told that you have to go from coast to coast to be able to do that. But with podcasting, you can literally be anywhere. You can be in the submarine at the bottom of the ocean recording, and as long as you can get that internet signal to go out, you can put episodes out, right? So there's no reason for the amount of creativity that we have in the center of the United States to not create shows and push it out. So that's what we do. We help them, but we also help podcasters across the United States. But obviously, you'll see like how does it benefit our mission and vision by doing that. So we also help podcasters get grant funding, like I said. And we'll walk through the steps of that, step by step. How does that look like? How does it work? Uh, do we personally have grants, or do we have partners, or, how do you get started in the whole process? And so we're going to walk you through the entire process of how to be prepared for looking for grants, how to apply for grants, how to use that funding, and then where to go from there. So in this workshop, we're going to learn, what to know about grants. So we need to educate yourself on what a grant is. I know we all have sort of an idea, and lots of us, I know Mary Ellen in the chat here, she deals with grants all the time, specifically for a podcast that she produces. And so way more familiar with it than anybody who's just heard of a grant, because I think one of the main ways that we hear in podcasting when we ask, how do I get funding? We hear ads. You need sponsors. You need to read about BetterHelp. You're in the middle of your ads. And then it works for some people. But there's also grant funding out there, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of it. And it's specifically for podcasting, and podcasting has a unique position in that. We'll get into that. Setting a podcast budget, because yes, you do need a budget for your podcast, and we'll break that down. And I've got worksheets for you. The grants process, grants research, applying for the grant, when you're asked to present your idea. And so we'll get into that. This is a if case, like what if case. After getting the grant, what to do, oh, what do we get out of it? So APC, as far as helping you get grants, at the Q&A, and then we'll give you my contact at the end. So what to know about grants? So grants are funds that have been set aside by individuals or organizations for projects that improve on individual or organization's mission and vision. These funds can range from a few $100s to millions, depending on the funding available and the size of the project. So most of these organizations and individuals put this money out there because they believe in a cause and they want to see projects created that help further that cause. So some of the largest grant givers, these are just notes: Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and those are just a few of the top ones. There are hundreds and thousands of other grantors that are out, both local, national, and international. So unlike loans, grants are funds that don't have to be repaid as long as the guidelines are being followed. So that's sort of the caveat there, where you have to make sure that the guidelines are being followed once you get the funding. As long as that happens, that money is yours to use. There are tons of grants available from state, national, even international organizations, and there are also individuals who distribute grants. While there are many grants available, they aren't all made public knowledge. Most of the ones that are listed publicly have specific needs that they want to be filled. Podcasts are rarely, if ever, mentioned in the description of a grant, but that doesn't mean that it excludes podcasts. In fact, that's part of the leverage that you're going to have by the end of this workshop. So, grants, are they all listed on one website? No, absolutely not. Are they listed on any website? There are some websites that do a great job of collecting grants. And some of them even made a business of it, a business model of it themselves, of collecting what grants are available out there and making you pay a subscription so that you can see what grants are available. That way you can apply. But there's also different ways of finding grants, but some of them are unlisted and also some of them are unsolicited. So they don't take solicitations, sorry. That means that you can't just apply for a grant in that situation unless they invite you. They find you and they invite you. So, but there are plenty that do invite solicitations. They want you to apply. They want to read about your project. And there are plenty of them that want to fund your project, as long as you've got all these details. So do podcasters get grants? Absolutely. So just a note, just because a grant listing does not specifically say podcast, it does not mean that it doesn't apply to podcasts. So setting a podcast budget, much like a small business, a podcast needs to have a budget plan. Your budget depends on the type of podcast, the length, who your guests are, and several other factors like travel and how much help you would need. So what goes into the cost of your podcast? Because while the barrier to entry to getting a podcast started has never been lower, right? So if you've got a phone in your pocket, you've got a studio to start with, you know. It may not sound the greatest all the time. It may not video greatest all the time. You may not have the greatest edits or transitions, but you've got something to start with and you can upload for free, right? So that's a good start. But what would be the bare minimum to think of if you were going to start a professional podcast? Having a definitive number to work with makes it easy to know how much to ask for. So make a list of equipment, your services, marketing that you'll need. Use our example podcast budget worksheets to give you a good starting point. I'm going to copy these links and I'm going to put them in the chat. There we go. And you should be able to click on that link and then you go to the top and say file and then make a copy. And you can create it. You can save a copy of that to your own Google Drive to use for later, or you can print it out if you'd rather deal with paper. But let's take a look at that just real quick, what those look like. So your podcast budget planning worksheet. So it comes in different steps. Step one is getting the idea down of what your podcast is. If you already have an existing podcast, great. You've got some room to work around with. But if you're just getting started and you're thinking of a new project to start, then we're going to have to start with a podcast title. And like, this is where some people get, frozen. It's like the creativity, deer in the headlights look, where it's like, oh, this matters so much because this is going to be the thing that everybody references me to. It's going to be, on all the marketing. It's going to be on all the printed and digital, and the podcast itself. Is it catchy? So you've got to have your podcast title, your podcast theme and genre. So, what is your podcast about specifically? Like, if you were to put it into a category, what would you categorize it as? Your target audience. Who is it that you want to listen to your podcasts? Some of the most successful podcasters that I've interviewed or talked with, people from Wondery, they all say that they create a fictional sort of avatar of a person that they create their show for. Now, let's say it's the person that doesn't exist, but they say, well, I create my show for Emily. Emily loves to eat meatloaf from a very specific diner on Tuesdays. She likes to play chess in the park. She also is into, indie folk music. It's getting very specific at what is Emily's life like. And then you're creating every show for that person. And it helps you to direct your show to be specifically for a group of people. So who is your target audience? Get some demographics down there. Your episode frequency. So how often are you going to put this podcast out? And I would say before you put this number, I would skip ahead to number 6. That way you've got a good idea of how frequently you can put these out, right? Because most of the time, and we'll get into this and why, most of the time, whenever you're proposing a podcast project for a grant, then you want to do it in a season. You must say, this is going to be the first season of this podcast, and it's going to have this many episodes. You've got to have a finite number. And so I would recommend anywhere between 6 and 10. You can do a little bit more than that, but when you try to propose 23 episodes, or it's just an ongoing, like this money doesn't last forever, right? So they have to have a finite package of what are they giving you the funds for. So your number of episodes per season, let's say it's 10. Okay. Well, with that 10 episodes, now I'll go to number 4. How often can I put these episodes out? Right. Then episode length. How long are the episodes going to be? Step 2, we go to the itemized budget. And that was that other sheet that I've linked in there. If you guys will take a look at that, and it'll help you break down line by line, what is the cost of your podcast? And we've already created these sheets. Same concept. If you go to file, create a copy, or you can print it from here. We've set these up already to where if you start putting your cost in, it'll calculate your total cost down here, and then your total cost for the entire podcast down at the bottom. But how much are your microphones going to be? How much are your headphones going to be? Pop filters, booms, arms, your audio interface. If you need a computer, a recording device, backup storage, if you need an SSD, or whatever else you're going to use. Because if it's also going to be a video podcast, and then that's going to be extra equipment as well. Most of the time, you'll have some of this that you can use. You can substitute. One of the things that you can absolutely do is put down the cost anyway, and then subtract the cost of what you already have. Well, let's say that you have a camera on here for $1,400, but you've already got that camera in your studio or wherever you're going to be recording from. You've got it in your possession to use at any time. Then you can subtract that. But ultimately, this is going to build you a cost sheet for your podcast. And so you take this total here, divide it by however many episodes you have, and then that's your cost per episode. But it gives you a good idea of how much you're going to actually need to produce this podcast. And so are you going to be doing it on your own? I really don't recommend that you do. If you're going to do a really nice production of a podcast, you're probably going to need some help. And if you're asking for funding, then ask for enough funding that you can afford that. So from music licensing, or even live musicians to record original scores for your podcast, sound effects, editing services, transcript services. Um, what would it look like if you could have a team that produces your podcast idea with you, right? And how much would that cost? What would that need? Get real quotes on this. Don't just guess. Um, find people who would be interested in doing this and get a quote from them and calculate that, add that in here. Marketing, of course, you're going to need a website. Graphic design means like your art for your podcast cover. Of course, social media advertising, promotional materials, anything that gets printed. If you're going to have, the silicone bracelets or any kind of business cards or anything like that, calculate that in here. And then email marketing, because that's a very popular way of getting the word out of each episode of your podcast. Miscellaneous is just travel. So this also matters in how are you going to be recording your podcast? What does it look like? Does it require you to travel? Do you have to go to be physically in the room with somebody that doesn't live near you to record these podcasts? If so, then you've got gas expenses, you've got wear and tear on your vehicle. Maybe you need to rent a vehicle or ride the bus or take a plane or stay in a hotel. So all of these need to be calculated and really think about. Don't keep an open budget is what I call that. So open budget would be where you're like, I will take a few trips. Okay. But specifically, what few trips are you going to take? Why are you going there? Who are you going to interview? Is it possible to go to that same location and film several of those interviews at once to condense it down? This is bare minimums. Let's work it down to how can we most efficiently do this, and what is the total cost of that? So once we have that total cost, that's what the itemized budget was for. So we take those total costs from each section, your equipment, your software, your production, marketing, miscellaneous, and then we put our total down there. So your funding plan, how much are you personally going to be putting into this? A lot of grants are going to ask how much in kind and donated service is going to be, added into this project. So your total cost, it's great to have that. But they're going to want to see some effort a lot of the times on like what can you give so that we're not funding the entire project. And obviously, like I said, if you've already got some of the equipment, if you already have a camera, if you already have a microphone, the pop filters, the computer to work with, those are great. Those are deducted, and those count as your personal investment that's going to go into this. So step 5, your budget management. So track your expenses. Obviously, you're going to want to keep a spreadsheet or something like that. Even if it's a doc that you just have open and you're calculating, you're keeping all your records. Keep your receipts of anything that you buy, especially if you're paying for gas and travel and hotels or equipment. Keep those receipts, keep them all together. Make sure, I mean, this is bookkeeping 101, right? You want all the paper documents and all the links and trails that show exactly where every dollar went. That way, if you're ever in question, you have presentable documents. Review regularly. Check where you are with your budget, making sure you're staying in line with what you agreed with, and that every dollar is going to where you said that it was going to go. And of course, adjust as needed. If you've accidentally spent too much in one direction, you have a conversation with the person that they assigned to you. They're usually going to have a bookkeeper or an administrator to be in contact with you to making sure that everything goes as planned. And these things happen. So where you accidentally spent $30 in the wrong box, more towards marketing than you were supposed to for the production side. And then you adjust. Usually that'll probably have to come out of your own pocket, or if you find another funder to help you there. But that's why it's so important to stay on track. Whatever you propose to them and they agree to, make sure you stay on track with that funding. Okay, so now that we have that podcast budget, like I said, you're free to take those with you. Please, fill them out. It'll really help you just as a podcaster, even if you're not looking for a grant. It will really help you in getting defined on how much each episode is actually costing you, even if it's an ongoing podcast, right? So the grants process. So now that we've got our sheet, how do we start getting and looking for grants? So grants aren't always easy to find. They're kind of like rare Pokemon, right? In fact, the ones worth applying for usually take some work to find. So we use a process that I call with the acronym READ, READ. So we research, we educate, apply, deliver. So research. Finding grants takes a little research skill. And there isn't one definitive mega website that lists every grant available. They're scattered across thousands of websites, landing pages, and newsletters. And as I mentioned before, some of them aren't even mentioned online at all. But here's a some good starting points here. Of course, number one, Google grants for blank. What is your podcast about? Put that in there. Um, Also, it helps to be location savvy. So if you're in a certain state or you want to serve a certain area of the United States, put that area in there as well. Grants for blank subject for blank area. To instrumental.com, and we'll check this out in just a couple of minutes. This is another pretty good website. It's one of those that has turned a business model into collecting grants and letting them be known for the public to apply for. It gets kind of expensive, but they do allow you to have a few free ones on the top to look at different podcasts and different grant possibilities for a podcast. Um, but it is more than enough, I would think, to even if you didn't pay for the service, to use those to get you on a good trail of finding a grant that applies to your podcast. Of course, the humanities and arts organizations are in every state. They usually have grants that are available with cyclical terms, and so that means that they accept or they will accept your grant application, between let's say April and June, and then another one from November to December. And it's a regular. Make sure you check your terms and when those grants are available, when the applications are due. Those are important details. Grantwatch.com is another good one. If you put your state dot grantwatch.com, a lot of different grant opportunities will pop up for you. And you can get more specific about like what genre or who it serves. And we'll take a look at that website in just a second. And of course, social media. The same way we searched on Google, search for on social media, see what's available out there. A lot of organizations will put out there that they are now open to accepting applications for a certain grant that's come out there. And sometimes grants pop up out of the blue. And they will post on social media before they have time to post it on a website. So number two, educate yourself. Once you find a few grants that seem like a close fit, read their full descriptions and educate yourself. Who is the grantor? What are they looking for? How can I learn as much as possible about that subject? And how can my podcast serve this subject? How can my podcast further the organization's mission? And what are the requirements? Okay, so let's look at those couple of websites I mentioned earlier. So here is Instrumental. So when you go to Instrumental, there's a sort of a landing page, but we go to browse, browse grants here. And this page opens up. And so I kind of like the way that their layout is, where they have all the categories of grants to the left, and then you select your state on the right. And they kind of do a lot of the legwork and, helping you nail down what are some good grant opportunities that are available out there. And so let's just say, for the sake of Arkansas, I think we have a lot of Arkansas people in here looking for blank in Arkansas. Well, let's look at what's available. addiction and substance abuse and everything A through Z, all the way through civil rights grants, diversity grants, fisheries. I mean, there's a grant for, absolutely everything. Community service projects, K through 12, LGBTQ, music education. I mean, all the way down to youth sports programs. So I'm just going to leave this blank and look at Arkansas's grants. What are the main ones that are just floating up on top? You scroll down here. And so we have a few different charities and foundations that have grants that are available to apply for right now. A lot of these say unspecified amount. And so some of them like to keep their cards close to their chest and they don't want to say how much the grant is for until you get down the line of the application process. Um, it's their way of sort of applying a filter of how many people are applying. Because if you say or see unspecified amount, you might be less likely to apply for that than if you saw this one down here for $75,000, right? You're like, okay, well, that's an amount of money I can work with. And so I'll click on that one. When you read these, make sure you pay attention to who it is that's giving these grants out, like this. Arkansas and West Texas Grants, Carl B. and Flora C. King Foundation. Have you ever heard of that foundation? You might need to educate yourself on that first. Find out if that's an organization that sort of could fit with your podcast. And we'll look at a few examples of how to make your podcast fit the situation in just a little bit. So community grants are awarded in Arkansas and West Texas in the following areas: aging population, meeting the physical and emotional needs of the elderly. I hear some words in there already where I'm like, okay, this is great. But if this is for the community, yeah, there we go. There's also supporting artistic, historical, or cultural experiences that enhance learning in school-age children or extend the benefit of the arts to children, the elderly, or others who might not otherwise have access. Like, this is a great one. Like, this is so open. There's so many different categories here that you could apply. And by the way, education, that is a key word in grants that applies to basically any podcast. That's because that's what you're doing. Whether you realize it or not, you're educating. When you are interviewing someone or you are doing a podcast on a certain subject, you do it for the intention of education, whether you realize it or not. You want awareness to be brought to that subject. Preparing young children for school, supporting the education process. Another one that we see a lot of grants in is literacy. And so this seems to fit along with that as well. So teaching kids, how to read, the importance of reading. And we've worked with, different programs inside of schools where we help them start their own podcasts as well, and then apply for NPR's annual competition for podcasts for kids. So, one of the things on here, let's say like supporting artistic, historical, cultural experiences that enhance learning in school age children. Okay. So let's say your podcast can interview people who are supporting arts in a certain area. But those people specialize in educating school age children. Have those conversations about, well, what's changing or what is your experience with that? Getting exposure to a lot of the cultures and the teachers that are out there that are helping in that area. So we're just spitballing, ideas. This is how it goes. You sort of see, okay, well, I could do that. I can make a podcast where it has these interviews with these people, and maybe even takes a look, an analytical look, and we think about, how has the education system rating, risen or fallen since these programs have been in place. One of the catches here is that where did I see that? So application type, nonprofit. So that can be a hangup. Because a lot, and we'll talk about this, a lot of organizations want to have a nonprofit fiscal partner. And we'll talk about what that means. Okay, so that was instrumental. I'm going to move my Zoom box so I can see what I'm looking at. And then let's see, where is the grants watch? Let's see. Let's say that you are in Texas, grantwatch.com. So I'll put texas.grantwatch.com. And they'll tell me right off the top how many grants are in their database, how many grants are for nonprofits. Okay. So there's still over 5,000, that are, or say just under 5,000 that would be for people who aren't nonprofits. But there are more opportunities here for who specifically work with nonprofits. So grants for individuals, 672, grants for small business. Same thing goes for Arkansas or wherever you may live in the United States. So less grants available, about the same amount for nonprofits, but less grants overall. And then it'll show you just a few examples of the top, just like instrumental. I don't think it's as pretty as instrumental, but there is some really good information here. This feels like a like a very older style of website built in the 90s, but it's functional. And if you can focus on it, then yeah, there's some really great information that's here. Let's go back to our slides. So some grants require you to have a nonprofit fiscal partner, and this creates a layer of trust between you and the grantor. Okay. So what that means is that the organization or the grantor, the ones that have the money on the line, that are willing to fund these projects, a lot of them will want a nonprofit fiscal partner, which is kind of a firewall. And so rather than just give you directly all of the funding that they've agreed to pay for your podcast budget, they would rather and feel safer to hand it to a nonprofit organization who could then help monitor and be your accountability partner in spending that money. Okay. And that's a lot of the roles that we play here at Arkansas Podcast Collaborative is we help accept the money on your behalf and then make sure that the agreed budget that you applied for is being spent exactly how you applied for it. So once you have educated yourself and can clearly see how your podcast can serve the needs of the grant, it's time to write it out in full detail. So when you're proposing this, why does it need to be a podcast? What's the format? What is it about? And who does it serve? Again, like who do you want your listeners to be, or who does it benefit? How many episodes and what is the timeline? How can you get this done in a timely manner? How long is it going to take you to produce each episode? How many episodes are there, right? And then do you produce along the way? Do you produce the whole show and then you put it out bi-weekly, weekly, monthly? Like, what does that look like exactly? You have to lay it out very plainly. Don't be vague. Be specific about how they're going to be funding you. What is this funding? What does the project look like? What are your deadlines that you're setting for yourself? So when applying for grants, make sure that you have, that says you have a limited number of episodes. A season of 6 to 10 episodes is perfectly reasonable. Like I said, that's absolutely doable. It is just enough episodes to where you're kind of in a position to where you have to pack a lot of information into those episodes, meaning you raise the value. And they know that their funding is going into a finite project. They know exactly how many episodes, how many are going to be put out there, how long it's going to take to produce those, and then how long it's going to take to get to that last episode. And then we measure, okay, what impact do we have? Did it reach the goal that you were setting for yourself? Did we achieve the thing that we agreed on when we gave you the grant? And then the D of the READ acronym is deliver. So if you're awarded a grant, it's a commitment to deliver what you promised. This funding is for what you have proposed, and the grantor expects to see what you do with it. This is also a reason why grantors prefer nonprofit fiscal partners. if you apply for a grant for a podcast and you propose that your podcast is going to reach a certain audience, right? A certain demographic, then you need to show them the analytics at the end of, hey, we said we were going to do this and it did. It reached them. Um, a lot of the times, if you're working with an archive, like every state has their own archive and every one of them has their own grant foundations that you can apply for. Um, they want to be able to archive your project. So lots of times, like we work with the Arkansas, state archive here. Whenever we produce a podcast for them, they want it on a flash drive, not just produced and put on the websites and an RSS feed. They want something that they can physically put in their archive for the future uses, for anybody to have in the public. Let's say the entire internet goes down some way, and they still want to have those files available to people, those audio files, then they need a way to do that. And so giving them a flash drive or an SSD, however, so that they can store it in their actual physical archive. With a lot of grantors that are giving grants for funding, they want to see, what was the reaction to this podcast? If it's about a certain subject that deals with their mission and their vision, they want to know, what were the interactions like? What was the reaction like? And what was the conversation being held? Are people, more likely to help in the mission and vision, or do people feel like they're more educated about a subject because of after? And so taking polls and what's called podcast 2.0, which is a whole workshop in its own. Podcast 2.0 allows you to ask questions at the end of your podcast. So let's say you're on Spotify, right? Each one of your episodes can have a poll. What did you think about this podcast? Or after hearing this podcast, do you feel more educated on whatever the subject matter is? What would you like to know more about in the future? Or what were some of your questions that you had come up while you were listening to this episode? And so people can respond to those, and it goes directly into your accounts on those hosting platforms so that you can review them, you can play them for later episodes and answer those questions. But ultimately, you're collecting data so that you can show the grantors, hey, this is how people reacted to the content. This is our success rate. This is how we're measuring that. A lot of times with podcasts, we sort of just create shows and put them out in the ether and hope that somebody draws to them. But with when you're getting a grant for a podcast and getting funding from another organization, you definitely want to have an ultimate goal in mind, and you've got a line in the sand that you're trying to reach. And so measure that. How far did you get? And then report back at the end, because that's what they want. So presenting your proposal. Sorry, I'm seeing a lot of chats. Okay, I'll answer your questions here at the end. I do have a Q&A session at the end. So presenting your proposal, there are some times when your written proposal sounds great and you've intrigued the grantor, but they want to hear more about your project from you, either in person or on a video call. And so sometimes they'll have their entire board in a room. I've been in those situations where they'll gather their board in the room, have you come in, and they'll have you present your idea that they've already read about because you presented your written idea. But now it's kind of like getting your driver's license, right? So you take your written test. Now you got to pass the driving test. So they want to hear from you directly as a human, and not a grant that's been written by AI or a chat GPT or anything like that. They want to hear directly from your mouth. What is your intention? And that matters, because it's just the difference of having a conversation with the person face to face, right? Those micro expressions, how you talk about a subject. Does it sound like you're passionate and that you're the right person, that you're competent enough to carry this out? And is this a good idea for them to fund you? And so make sure that you're educated on your own project as much as possible. I mean, I think I put it here, but be prepared. This isn't Shark Tank, but it's the same concept where you'll still need to be knowledgeable and about what you're proposing. Don't focus too much on the numbers and how many listeners you're going to generate and all that. It's kind of irrelevant, but tell them how you're going to get in communication with the group that they want to get in communication with, right? So the demographics or the education groups, the goal that they've set, really hone in on that. Why podcasting for one? And then how does your project help in their mission and the grant for? Why do you need the funding? And then what does this funding go towards? Make sure you have that on top where they're going to ask you about your itemized budget, that worksheet that we went through earlier. They're going to ask you, okay, well, why do you need this? Why do you need $10,000 for a website? And you'll have to answer that. Why? Well, if it's not an idea that needs a $10,000 website, then they're going to ask you to decrease that, right? But if your website is very important to the mission of the podcast itself, where it requires a lot of, interactions, or where people come and sign up for the newsletter, which gets more interactions there, or if it's written articles or blog posts, or how many features does this podcast have that requires it to be a $10,000 website, right? So you're going to have to be prepared to answer those questions. So as an added bonus, by working on refining your idea for a podcast for these grants, you're also niching down to creating your content for a very specific audience. And so it helps you as a creator ultimately, to where you're not trying to be Amazon, which, a lot of people try to be. They say, I'm going to start a podcast and it's going to be a Joe Rogan style interview where I'm going to talk to people. Well, you're not Joe Rogan and you're not interviewing celebrities most of the time. And a lot of the times it's going to be you talking to another person. So who is that for? Is it for a specific group? Are you talking about a specific subject? And if so, let's get even more specific about that. Like what area inside of that subject? And so when you're working on your idea for this podcast, proposal for a grant, it's actually helping you niche down your podcast so far down to where you know exactly who your podcast is for. So here's just a few adjustment examples. And these are not ones that I've seen, but we've worked with very similar types of ideas. So let's say somebody has an idea for a podcast that interviews interesting personalities near you. That's everyone, right? I think everybody starts with that idea. And then the state archive wants projects that are focused on preserving historical stories for rural communities. Well, so you revise your project idea. Okay, we're going to do a podcast that interviews elders in the rural communities around you to record their stories, preserve that oral history. That's an interesting project, especially to a lot of archival sort of organizations that want to preserve history. That's a great example of that. So another one is a podcast that is about healthy mindset with thought leaders around the world. Okay, well, right now this is an active grant that's open right now. The Grays Harbor Community Foundation, if you happen to be living in Washington, offers up to $30,000 for improving the quality of life for its citizens. Okay, you see that nowhere in there it said anything about podcasting, but it was also very non-specific about what it was looking for. So you revise your idea to fit that. So a podcast about healthy mindset with leaders in several areas of wellness in Grays Harbor, Washington. Okay. And then, of course, we're going to have to get some more descriptions about, well, who does this benefit? Obviously, the citizens there, but like they've specifically put out there that this grant is for improving the quality of life for its citizens. How are you going to argue that your podcast is doing that? Education, right? That education word. So you are educating people on wellness and health, which overall improves the quality of life for those citizens. Another example is a podcast that interviews filmmakers. You just want to talk to filmmakers. You want to start a podcast that does that. There are plenty of them out there. A lot of them on YouTube, a lot of them successful, but a lot of them have to niche down. And so right now, this is another active grant that's available. The Legal Foundation of Washington offers $50,000 for projects that promote race equity. Okay. It didn't say anything. Sorry, but
Привет, как у тебя давление?
Somebody's got their microphone on.
110, а сейчас перешла вот 133. Нормально.
Olga, I'm gonna mute you.
Почему такое утром высокое? Почему?
Where are you at? There you go. Okay. Yeah, so the idea is to have a podcast that interviews filmmakers. Okay, so the grant that's out there right now offers 50,000 for projects that promote race equity. And so nowhere in there did they say anything about the film industry, then nowhere in there did they say anything about a podcast, or really they just left it open. And so offers 50,000 for projects that promote race equity. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's lots of different ways of doing that. And so if you're promoting or if you're, suggesting your podcast can do that, then you adjust the idea for your podcast to be a podcast that interviews and highlights the up and rising filmmakers of color. That's that's enlightening. So that helps you niche down your idea, but also makes it, fit their mission and vision of their organization and what the grant is asking for. So after you receive your grants, when you're rewarded with a grant, it's time to celebrate, but don't spend a dime. That's what I talked about earlier. Make sure you don't spend a dime of that grant funding anywhere other than where you proposed. It's okay. Buy your own bottle of champagne. It's all right. The funding that you proposed is for that itemized budget that you send in. It's for hiring the people to help you produce your podcast. It's for the equipment. It's for the time that you put into it. It's for your travel, your expenses. It's to help the podcast itself. You'll be able to be matched when, whenever you are given a grant, you'll be matched with a bookkeeper or administrator in the grantor's organization to stay in contact and keep records. So they'll be calling in pretty regularly. Hey, how's the project going? I know you said you set your this many, dates, and you have a timeline and a deadline for this. Were you able to do that, or do you need more time for that? Have you spent any of the funding that you needed for travel, for marketing, for your equipment? How has that gone? And have you bought your equipment yet? Have you bought or paid the people that are going to be helping you put this together yet? And they may ask to, see some receipts. Like I said, keep your receipts. Make sure you've got a paper trail that connects that you are doing the responsible thing with the amount of funding they have given you. So fiscal partner opportunities. As I said earlier, lots of organizations prefer that you work with a nonprofit organization as a sort of buffer between you two that gives them a level of trust and holds you accountable. So Arkansas Podcast Collaborative has worked with several major grantors to help podcasters get funding. Just recently, we worked with the Simons Foundation to get a podcaster in LA, $75,000 to produce a podcast about a certain medical facility. And it's a 10 episode. But it's got humor in it. And it was an original idea. And in the grants application, it never asked for a podcast, but she still proposed the podcast, got the $75,000. And then we help her stay on track, making sure all that money goes exactly where it's supposed to be going. The benefit that you receive when working with us is that there's a level of trust between us and the grantors because yes, we're nonprofit and maybe they don't even know us, but they know that we have something on the line, right? Plus we have a history of being responsible with, grantors funds, but they know that as a registered, nonprofit 501c3, we've got a lot on the line. Like if we do something wrong, we've got to answer to the IRS. And so it doesn't cost you anything either. Like I said, that itemized budget, you'll notice that we never put ourselves in there. That's because we can't. We cannot take a portion of any of your grants. So we don't ask for any. And so what we do ask for, and I'll get to that in just a little bit, is kind of help in our mission and vision. So you have an accountability partner with us. You have access to more resources, whether it be if you don't know anyone who can edit a podcast or if you need help with coaching, that we can absolutely connect you with those people. We help you look for the grants as well to see what would be a good fit. So we start with, like I said, those ideas, and then we find the grants, and then we help you revise that idea for a grant so that it fits that and go through the application process. So what do we get out of it? What do we ask? So we ourselves operate off of grants that were awarded so that we can keep helping podcasters like yourselves. When we help get you the grant funding, the only thing that we ask are, one, this is the mainstay, which is name us in your show notes. that helps grow awareness of what we do, and it helps other podcasters get in contact and take advantage of the resources that we have. Two, uh, be a speaker at one of our events, either in person on or online, which is great for you also because that gives you more exposure. But we have plenty of events that we host year round. And we want to add as much value to the people that are attendees as possible. And we want to let them know from successful podcasters like yourself, how did you do your process? What, or hear your expertise in a certain field or area. Potentially hire someone from our network. Once you put your team together, and if you're going to hire an editor or if you need to hire someone for the music, for the scoring of your podcast, we ask that you consider, some of the people that we have here in this area, in those forgotten about states, those talking about. We have a list of people that we can send over to you with resumes and examples, and we help you sort of work through that and see if any of them are a right fit. Hopefully, you do find the right fit and they're able to get hired. Potentially collaborate for an event that we don't host. Like I said, we do travel. We went to Podcast Movement in LA, and have done other things in St. Louis and Texas, but would love to get involved in more things across the country. I think we may have cornered ourselves whenever we came up with the Arkansas Podcast Collaborative, because people hear that and they think that we're only for Arkansas, but it's not true. So I'd love to raise awareness about what we do and help other people get the funding. So questions, I'll open that up now. And let's go to your chat. See if there's anything there. Mind sharing the itemized budget link as well. Thanks in advance. Not sure the itemized budget link has been added. It's okay. So somebody did share that. Yeah, the spreadsheet. Open the document. I hope everybody was able to receive that link. Managed to grab the URL from the top of Ty's browser. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Barry. That's good. That's great looking out. Thank you. If anybody did miss that doc. Okay. Yes. Jean has a question. What's your question?
Hi,
I'll post it.
my name is actually pronounced Jean.
Oh, excuse me, Jean.
It's okay. You can't see my face. I met you at the last in Fayetteville.
Okay, great.
I have and I'll be there next week in Bentonville. I have a concern because what I'm doing on my podcast is pretty.
Yeah, the other side.
That's not me talking, by the way.
I know. Hold on a second. I'm gonna mute. Okay, you can go ahead. I'll work on that while you're talking.
Also, I just want to say that I love the idea of getting support from local people and people that are already doing it, because I would much rather that. So that's wonderful. I wanted to say thank you for that. And but the what I want to do my podcast on is the topic can be very controversial. So I think that it may be quite difficult for me to find funding for it. And I guess what I'm saying is that maybe I would like to speak with someone about like what I do want to talk about, and to see if it even would be potentially, if I could find grant funding for it.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, we had the conversation when I met you at the podcast meetup.
Who I am.
Yes, I do. I do remember you now.
Thanks, Ty.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, no problem at all. And you had, yes, a very particular subject matter, and I believe that there are grants for that. Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Because I really feel like the education is needed, and there's a very huge lack of education around it.
Absolutely. And that goes for so many different other subjects. I think one of the things is, when we had the conversation, you said you wanted to interview people, but I don't think that we had it niched all the way down, right? So we didn't have all the full details down to who exactly is this for, who does it help, and, how does it further a mission or a vision? So I think working with you, which of course we're willing to do, will help you narrow that down to be a better fit for grants that are available out there. Does that make
Great,
sense?
that's great. Yeah, I really am
Okay.
interested in doing this, and I want to put the work into it and the sweat equity. I want to put the work into it,
Okay.
because I am passionate about it. But I do feel like I have it narrowed down. Maybe just you and I didn't get a chance to volley that back and forth with
Sure.
each other. So
Yeah, and I'm happy to open that conversation up
okay,
after
great.
this.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Hey, no problem at all. Thank you, John. Um, let's go to. All right, Perry, I see you on here. I see you posted a question here about the NPR sustainable grants.
Yeah, not necessarily like through NPR, but you'll hear them like as they're mentioning their shows, they'll say this show's made possible by a sustaining grant from the blah 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 foundation.
Right.
And I'm wondering if that is a way of describing something where you have a pre-established run rate because you've got a staff and you've got, you know, all the subscriptions and equipment and everything else that you need, like I do, but you're just wanting ongoing funding for the deliverable.
Right.
And the deliverable is really just units of work that it takes to create and edit rather than a lot of the other stuff that's on the budget sheet.
Right. I think Mary Ellen is here. And she's on camera as well. So she actually gets a lot of those grants for NPR shows. Arts and Letters is one of her main shows that
Nice.
she does. So she'd be better equipped to answer that one for you. You mind it, Mary Ellen?
Oh, no, I'm happy. I wish Karen was here though, because she worked for KUAR, the local NPR Central Arkansas affiliate for many, many years. So she would probably be best if you want to follow up with her, Perry.
Sure.
But sustaining usually means that they give you a consistent gift monthly, or they give you funding over multiple years. And usually, sometimes some shows will do it where they've worked with the grantor enough where the grantor writes it into their annual budget. So
Right.
then that nonprofit then doesn't have to apply every year. So that's
Yeah.
what's meant by sustaining grant.
Okay.
Those take years of development. But I think Ty gave excellent advice with a budget in terms of you could apply for a grant just to do that production and that final maybe editing or mix and
Right.
mastering or whatever you need to do for those 6 to 8 shows that you kind of cluster together. I'm sorry, Ty said 6 to 10 in one season. I think that's really feasible for some of these grants that Ty has mentioned. And man, Ty, that some of those grant search websites were fantastic. So
thanks.
that would be, I don't know if that answered your question, Perry, but I've never gotten a sustaining grant
Okay.
because they take many, many years to develop. And basically, I think what Ty was emphasizing is being accountable with the deliverables and with the delivery, the final D that Ty mentioned.
Right.
That's what builds that relationship with that foundation. So that would be like if you consistently get a gift from a foundation for a year or 2 or 3 years, then you could, in a sense, have that trust and relationship with them and then ask them for that kind of sustaining grant.
Right. Yeah, I think, and maybe we can touch base offline. But like if you look at the backlog of stuff that we've already done with the podcasts that we have, we've developed really good faith within the communities that we're trying to speak to and represent. And you know, at this point, it is just what is a cost per episode that we could like theoretically come. I mean, I've got a run rate of what it costs to operate for a year, and that, you know, generally doesn't change because I'm just paying somebody the same amount every 2 weeks. And so I'm just trying to find a way to like back that into what a grant would be, and we could definitely promise and be accountable to a certain amount of episodes per season that somebody would give a grant to. But giving the detailed breakdown gets really hard because it's like what would be a fraction of a music license subscription, a fraction of Riverside.fm subscription. That just gets to be a little bit weird after a while. So, but yeah, maybe that's an offline conversation about figuring out how to build the narrative around that.
It definitely is. I mean, it all depends on, like I said, every show is going to be different. There are going to be similarities, but there's going to be, some issues that are very specific to you and your show and what your idea is of how to do it, right? So those subscription services that you're talking about with Riverside, if that's how you're recording, other people just record directly to, your P4 or your Zoom products or your camera, and then they go into Adobe, uh, Adobe Premiere Pro afterwards and just edit it all together and then they put it out there, but they never use, a recording program like Riverside or StreamYard or any of those, right? So yeah, I'd love to have a conversation, after at some point. And like I said, Karen is a member of a team that Mary Ellen was talking about. She's another founder of APC.
Okay.
And she knows a lot about that and helped write a lot of the grants that kept a lot of the shows afloat at the NPR station.
Great. Yeah, I'll shoot you a note and see what we can figure out. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions? I'm going to check this chat here. Producer and sound designer. This is Asher. Producer and sound designer, composer, audio engineer here in Arkansas. How do I get on that network list? That network list. I'm not really sure what you're referring to.
You
Asher.
mentioned a little bit earlier that you would be hiring or suggesting people to hire
Got
people
you.
on your
Okay.
list.
Got you. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and we'll definitely put you, in the database. And if anybody else is interested as well as being referred to other podcasts that get funding and you want to be on the hiree list, I'll send you a sheet and like you'll have to fill it out, of course, and like give examples of some of your work. We want to make sure that we're giving, it's a process for us, but verified and, reputable, like I guess you'd say, work, making sure we're giving out the best of the best. Because when people typically hear, that you're going to hire some podcasters from Arkansas, you know what I mean? It doesn't always go over so well outside of the state. But if we're showing them that we have consistent quality and we're really great creators, which we do, which I already know, and we're putting you up on stage, like we want to make sure that that's the best. I already know you, Asher. I know you do good work. I was just putting that out there. Anybody else have any questions? Checking the chat here. Can you send us the slide deck after the webinar? Absolutely. I'll send you a link to the slide deck. Thanks, Robert, for that question. Managed to grab the URL. Okay, we got two more down here at the bottom. Asher already has a fiscal partner, but you all sound like a much better deal, more accessible, more involved, helping discover grants. And would you like to talk about partnership with you? Also, is it problematic to have to? It's I don't know how it would actually work to have to. I know that with one, then they're dealing with one organization, that's handling the funds and making sure that you're being responsible and held accountable. If it's two, it may look suspicious, but they will ask for, like, whenever that fiscal partner is involved with your grants, they will ask that they get confirmed by other outside organizations to make sure that you are legit. Okay, so that's one way that partnership could work as well. The reason that a lot of podcasters have been going with us is because of all the connections we've made, but that we are the only nonprofit for podcasters. Okay, so a different nonprofit that is for a different area of the humanities or something like that. Not saying that those are bad partners at all. But our mission and vision is literally helping podcasters with creating that diverse group of people that are creating in the podcasting field. So it's what we specialize in. We have a lot of people on staff that can help, and it's all we're connected to the resources to help you get your podcast to the very best that it absolutely can be. All right, so I don't see. Okay, email you later today. Okay, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Okay, so one final thing after our questions. So how to contact us. If you do want more information about how we can help you, find grants, apply for grants, and become a fiscal partner with you, you can just email me at tyking@arkansaspodcasters.org. Of course, our website also is arkansaspodcasters.org. We are planning right now for the third annual RCast Podcast Festival this year. And so September 14th, we're going to be in Little Rock at the Delta Hotels. It's a full day. We're bringing in podcasters from all over the country, from Seattle and New York and Santa Monica, to come in and talk about their journey in podcasting. Some of them work for companies like Wondery and PRX, some of the major podcasting companies. iHeart Podcasts also. To have a full day of keynote speakers, breakout sessions, hands-on tutorials for different equipment. We have lots of vendors, lots of podcasters that will have booths themselves to tell you about their content, meetups, and we pretty much have the run of the whole hotel for that whole day. A couple other dates to be aware of is that October 16th, we're going to be at the Ron Robinson Theater, taking it over for an evening for a Halloween themed live podcast recording on stage with a live crowd. We've got horror film directors, and I can't wait to tell you guys like who we booked and who's coming in to be guests on this and what kind of awesome. It's going to be so much fun. If you enjoy Halloween and spooky stuff, you're going to love this. And then November 14th through the 16th, we have the big event of the RCast 2024 in Fayetteville, Arkansas, at the Fayetteville Library. Lots of speakers, lots of podcast companies coming in, Disctopia from California, and then we're going to end everything, bookend it with a podcast pitch contest. So if you have an idea for a podcast or know somebody that would like to pitch a contest on stage, they will be able to present and then have voting from the crowd live, and then they win a pretty substantial amounts of equipment, funding, gift cards, and services from some of these podcast industry services to get their podcast started. That's the grand prize there for the top three. So you can find all that at arkansaspodcasters.org. Again, feel free to contact me, tyking@arkansaspodcasters.org. And thank you so much for everyone to sit here and learn about how to get your grants. And we'd love to help and to see more people obtain these grants, to be able to use it and push our industry forward. And that's what we're here for. So last check in the chat. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. Good. I'm glad everybody got something. Thank you, Marianne. And we'll talk to you later. And thank you for everybody. And I will send the link to these slides to everybody's email after this. So have a great day. Bye.